Hey y'all, I'm Josie,
And I'm Vickie.
and today we're going to take learning about femicides and immigration little by slowly.
This is a trigger warning for anyone um, who'd be sensitive to this information. We'll be talking about brutal crimes against women, homicide, and femicide.
Maybe let's start with that. Femicides and immigration, they are pretty heavy and serious topics. And Victoria and I we've heard of femicides, but we've been trying to learn more about it because it is impacting so many people from so many different um, countries, and it just seemed like something we wanted to broaden and learn, and doing learning about that in this podcast felt appropriate to us. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important. It's something that's really important to talk about and something that's really prevalent worldwide. And I also don't think that it's well known. I think that a lot of people don't know that it's happening, or a lot of people don't think that it's happening at the rate that it is. So, like
Mm-hmm.
Jocelyn said, I think that it is really something that's important to talk about and something that felt important to talk about once we had learned a little bit more about it. So, say that it might sound like we're listing off just like facts that we're reading from the internet today, and that might be the case just because we're not experts on this and we're like learning along with whoever is watching this with us. So if it sounds that way, we apologize, but it's important to get things correct and factual.
I also don't believe that you have to be an expert to begin starting talking about something,
Mm-hmm.
because if you wait until we're an expert, then where's how's that conversation going to start? Um,
I agree.
and I also think about in doing this um and sending articles to each other, I realized there are so many other cases that exist that I didn't know were considered femicides, and I didn't um consider them as such. But I think through this I'm getting a better grasp and understanding.
So, femicide is generally understood to involve intentional murder of women because they are women, but broader definitions include any killing of women or girls. And then there's several different types of femicides. We don't have to go into detail about them, but I think it's important to name them. So there's intimate femicides, murders in the name of honor, dowry related femicides, and then non intimate femicides. For femicides, this is a quote: femicide is usually perpetrated by men, but sometimes female family members may be involved. Femicide differs from male homicide in specific ways. For example, most cases of femicide are committed by partners or ex partners and involve ongoing abuse in the home, threats or intimidation, sexual violence, or situations where women have less power or fewer resources than their partner. They're just basically the World Health Organization is just saying that based on policies and laws and research that have been put in place, they've generalized it to being intentional murders of women. Yeah, so that kind of speaks to something we were talking about before we started recording that Jocelyn brought up about femicides being more prevalent. Femicides having correlation with education. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In one of the articles that Victoria sent to me, it was talking about that that um that women who don't have college education are more like are more likely to have this act of femicide committed against them. And at first, when we read that, me and Victoria were like, "What?"
Yeah.
But as we started thinking about it, it made sense, because it mentioned how women who are college educated are more likely to be able to provide for themselves or have their own source of income. And on the contrary, those women who don't have that opportunity for college education and to have their own self-sustaining income, it is more likely that they have to be dependent on their partner. And again, that's where we get into the cycle of abuses and how it can evolve into the act of femicide. And femicides don't always like happen by a partner that somebody already by someone's partner. Sometimes it can happen through unknown folks or family members, as well as Victoria mentioned earlier, that sometimes mothers will commit these acts as well. Mothers of the partner.
Yeah.
I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So the World Health Organization has that section underneath non-intimate femicides. So it's femicides committed by someone without an intimate relationship with the victim is known as a non-intimate femicides. Such killings can be random, but they're disturbing examples of systematic murder of women, particularly in Latin America. And something that they prefaced this with was that collecting correct data for femicides are really challenging because it isn't often reported, and a lot of the military or police presence in countries that this is happening in are corrupt. So they're not actually reporting the things that are happening, or they're not viewing them as femicides and not reporting them as such. So
like, again, I think that's why it's like important to be able to like acknowledge it and being able to like when such cases come up to be able to name it as femicide. And I don't know, maybe that can also be contributing to like those like statistics not being able to be fully accurate, because it's not being talked as like femicide. It's not being put under this term so often. So it made me think back to the WHO article, which was like listing off risk factors of who is like more likely to perpetrate femicide. And a lot of it had to do with previous violence and like gun ownership and like already threatening to kill women, and just those already like previous acts of violence that somebody holds. And again, that makes me think about like how within like intimate within the intimate femicides, it can be done like through, it can like escalate through like the cycle, that relationship violence cycle. I don't think that's the right term for it.
I don't think it's the wrong term for it either. But I do understand the way that you're saying that femicides are perpetuated by this systemic cycle of domestic violence, and how it's further perpetuated by people who have past and reoccurring occurrences of physical violence toward others, and that just amplified if they own some sort of firearm, which is why that kind of perfectly leads into something that I had seen on Twitter recently back in March. The reason why I say that it leads perfectly into that is because I'm thinking of like police officers and their firearms and stuff. There is a case of a Salvadorian migrant / refugee. Her name was Victoria, and she was murdered by police in Tulum, Mexico. After detaining her, the police held her face down with a knee on her back, and she was yelling for them to stop, but they did not. She was only 37 years old, and she left behind 2 daughters. So I thought that was a really significant case that happened quite recently that could be described as a femicide, and also leads into our second topic about immigration, which we can talk a little bit more in depth about later, but I want to give this case kind of its due. But it leads into Mexico's very strong resistance into letting Central American refugees and migrants into the country. The weekends that Victoria was murdered, there was 3 other women who were killed in Mexico, in a state in Mexico located in Tulum, on that same weekend, which are also considered femicides. So I thought that was incredibly interesting and incredibly sad. But yeah, I thought that was a really prevalent case that leads directly into our next topic, and I wanted to talk about it and kind of put some words to Victoria. And I'm gonna put like a little, like the illustration that was done of her. It's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful picture that they drew of her. So
in thinking about that case, I'm thinking also about how some of the articles that we were reading were discussing that like Mexico and other countries have imposed laws against the act of femicide, but yet those laws have not impacted have not lowered the numbers of femicides. And I just think about like the way these like nation states aren't really like there are these laws, but what are the real implications of that, and how are states protecting women, and what are the outcomes, what is the word? Not outcomes, but for the person who is for the person who is committing the femicide. What are the consequences for that person, and how is that being enforced? And like within from what I read from Mexico, even though they have these laws, it's not really doing anything to stop those numbers.
I agree. What? They have all of these things. They have all of these laws and regulations in place, but the police force and the military in Mexico are so corrupt that none of this is actually having any significant impact on the safety of these women.
As these cases like continue, there's also been protests to call these states to action to do more. To do more, because again, countries aren't acting against these.
Yeah. Around Mexico's Independence Day, I had shared a bunch of different artwork that I had found through Instagram of different artists putting into words that it's Mexico's Independence Day, and they're touting this freedom, and everyone's really proud, and they're really proud to be Mexican. I'm extremely proud to be Mexican, but there still needs to be some recognition of the mistreatment of the trans community, of the women community, of the Black, Indigenous, and persons of color community in Mexico that are often underrepresented and mistreated and not seen as people, not given all of their rights. There should be some sort of recognition about that. So I had shared a lot of artwork and like signs that were made at different protests, protesting femicides and protesting all of these injustices. So I can pop them around the screen and put links in the description to the artists who created those. But they're great. I think that's another way to show resistance and to protest and stuff like that, because I think something that was seen, this is related but not related, something that we've seen, especially in 2020, that there's different ways to protest and there's different ways to kind of shed awareness on things. Not everyone has the ability to go out there and march and to be on the forefront in that sense, but that doesn't mean that they're not aware of the issues. That doesn't mean that they're not impacted. That doesn't mean that they're not attempting to show their resistance in some ways. And that can be through art, that can be through donating, and that can be through something like this, where we're just bringing awareness to it and speaking on it. And sometimes it can feel like you're like shouting into a void, but there's someone listening, someone cares.
And something else that I read last year on International Women's Day, when Mexico also protested down in Mexico City. And one of the hashtags that they were using was Un Día Sin Nosotros, so a day without us. And within that movement, they were challenging the government for not acting against those femicides. And actually, I think in that year also, it looks like 19 countries in Mexico declared a gender violence alert. Oh, actually, Victoria, have you ever heard of that one piece of I guess it's like public art where you take all these red shoes and you just lay them out?
Yes, I have seen that before.
Yeah, it looks like that's also one of the ways that folks protest against these femicides and these acts.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have definitely seen that before. But once again, I feel like the correlation between the two wasn't happening in this moment. I feel like that's the running thread for this conversation, is that we're learning so much about this and learning how there's so much connectivity between all these different things that we didn't think was there. And I think one of the first like links that we saw in that was, do you remember what you were speaking about before about the murder of, yes, about Vanessa, Fiona?
Yeah, so within the United States, in looking up femicides, the case of Vanessa Guillen, I believe it's her last name, and within the United States, I want to say this happened in 2020, and she was in the army, and they couldn't find her, and it resulted that it was somebody else who had a higher ranking who ended up killing her. So ended up killing her. She was sexually harassed by that man, and she was only 20 years old, and this happened in Fort Hood, Texas. And when I first heard of that case, I didn't understand it as a femicide. Yeah, I hadn't understood it as a femicide, and it wasn't until most recently, like within this week, that I began to understand it as a femicide, because it was an act of violence and murder against the woman. Her disappearance happened in April and then was not found until June. And I think it's just kind of like, once you start applying definition, it's kind of, I guess, scary and shocking to see all the cases of it, but I think, again, that's why it's important to be able to like name it as a femicide.
Yeah, 100%. The second topic that we wanted to talk about today, which was immigration and kind of what's happening currently in the United States, and then also what's happening in Mexico and that kind of situation. So you can kick it off if you'd like, or I can.
Yeah. I can go. The reason we like chose to like pair these topics, because as Victoria mentioned earlier, a lot of this, like Victoria, she was Salvadoran and was also a refugee, I believe you had mentioned, and how within this process of migration, like how that's also impacting femicide as well. So that's why for us it felt fitting to include both those topics. And specifically within Central America, due to violence that is occurring within Central America, we're beginning to see like an influx of Central Americans trying to get asylum or refugee status within the states, but it looks like within Mexico they're not able to do that, because it looks like there's just like blocking off that are happening, so we're going to see them here within the United States. I don't know, I just think I guess the word disgusting, it's disgusting that that countries can decide to not allow someone who is already going through violence and who needs to leave their country, and that a country can decide, yeah, we're just going to block them off from entering, try again at the next one. And that, again, is just putting them through a more vulnerable position. Yeah, I guess that's my thought on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. If I'm being very honest, I feel like I always feel like I don't know enough about immigration to speak on it wholly, but I do know that situations like that, where if you are coming into a country for a better life, if you're coming into a country fleeing whatever situation is happening in your country, then like you deserve to be here, and you deserve the opportunity to be safe and to like find a new home. And I do think it is disgusting. I do agree that I don't think that it's entirely fair for countries like Mexico and the United States to purposely keep these individuals out because of xenophobia, because of other things like that. I know, I want to pull up the facts so I don't misspeak, but it was in 2017 that over 70,000 migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua had gone missing crossing the border into Mexico during that past decade. So I thought that was something that I saw, and I was like, I was so disgusted. I was so appalled just like seeing stuff like that, and how just like things like that are happening, are still happening, or not seeming to stop in any way, shape, or form, and are just happening because of xenophobia. And I don't know what else. I can't speak for them on what is causing this like hate for Central Americans. I don't understand it.
And I guess I just want to give some context as to why we keep saying that countries are blocking them off.
Yeah.
So within the Convention and Protocol relating to status of refugees that was done by the UN, by the United Nations, and many nations had like signed this, and it was just kind of basically a statement saying that if the UN decides what countries are able to apply for refugee status based off what's going on in your country, and several countries in Central America are included in that. But so if somebody from a country enters, let's say the United States is supposed to give them the ability to be able to apply for refugee and make their case. But if what happens is that these countries since they signed that and since they're part of that agreement, a way that they try to get around that is by making it nearly impossible for folks to enter the country. And that's why like sometimes like within like overseas you see such like when going through an airport and going through different countries, like you see the United States in France already like screening to make sure that other folks who don't have the passports and the necessary documents to be able to get in. Or that's why we see ships along the coast also ensuring that folks aren't able to make it in through the ocean. Or so we kind of just see kind of like countries extending, I guess, their borders in a metaphorical sense to prevent those applying for refugee status to be able to enter. And again, it is very awful because that statistic you gave on how many folks go missing is awful. And even thinking of how many children get separated, because so often we see, especially right now in the U.S., we're seeing children coming in without their parents. These families are put in a position where they feel like it is safer for their child to enter in without them, because that is the option that they are left with. And I think within the United States, we keep seeing people making these arguments where like, oh, they're going to put a drain on our economy, or why let them in, like, and let them bring their violence and their issues here. And it's like, that's not what's happening. That's not the reality. Like just again, continue to think of what position somebody has to be in to not just cross one border, but multiple to get into the United States. Like,
yeah, I completely agree. I think immigration can be a really sensitive topic. It can be a really sensitive topic and can cause a lot of debate, but I don't think there's any debate on just human decency and the idea that these individuals aren't like evil demons who are trying to sneak into the country and hurt everyone. Like you said, they're going through so much to just have something better than what they have from where they're coming from. So at least you can respect that they're putting in all of this effort and risking their lives and risking the lives of the people that they love just so they can get out of whatever situation that they have. And you could be living your comfy life in the suburbs of Illinois or in Chicago and sitting there saying, like, I don't want these people in my country. They're stealing things from us. And you're not thinking of their situation. You're just making shit up because you're watching Fox News.
And that reminds me of a poster that I saw from the Australian government. And I'll send it to you later just so you can like look at it. But it's on the poster, it has a photo of like these very turbulent seas, and it says, "No way, you will not make Australia your home." And on the poster, it says, "The Australian government has introduced the toughest border protection measures ever. If you get on a boat without a visa, you will not end up in Australia. Any vessel seeking to illegally enter Australia will be intercepted and safely removed from Australian waters." And it's at the bottom, it says, "Think again before you waste your money. People smugglers are lying." So I just think about like these uses of like this, like I feel like that propaganda is like targeting both Australian natives and then also refugees, and saying like, hey, don't enter here. And by saying like people smugglers are lying, that's also just like, no, you're not gonna be able to make it. And the way we see that like within like the US too, and like by like presidents saying that they're going to make it harder to make it into the US, or like threatening that they'll do like a shoot first kind of policy, or like anything like that, just trying to scare people from even thinking that they could have safety in here. And then like when they do make it, like it is so hard because people already have like all these preconceived notions, thinking that they're not that they're going to be a drain on the economy, or that there can't be enough resources and stuff.
The poster that you were talking about in Australia made me think of this artist, Jose Villalobo. He did this art piece where he has a tank of water over his head, and it is essentially a performance art piece talking about the hundreds of migrants that die while seeking to reach the US each year. They drown in the swift running Rio Grande and perish in sweltering Sonora deserts, or suffocate in the back of tractor trailers driven by migrant smugglers. So I can also link his work, and I'll can put like a little picture up of his work, but it's just another example of a performance art piece that is bringing light to situations like that. Shows how prevalent it is for individuals to even unfortunately pass away while they're trying to get to the location, and how there's so much propaganda trying to scare people away from doing it, and even then they still do it because that is better than what's behind them. So
yeah, I think when it comes down to it, definitely in looking up this information and talking about it with you, definitely feel like I still need to learn more, but I'm glad that we are starting to have this discussion, because it's definitely starting for me as like a push to learn more and see how it's because clearly impacting so many people. Being able to name the violence that is being perpetrated by the state, and it's really important. I know we've said that like multiple times throughout this recording, but like it is.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think conversations like this are really important to me, especially with people that I look up to and people who are my friends, which are you. I look up to you, and you're one of my closest friends. I might even say that my best friend. But I think that these conversations are really important, and I think they really fall into line with the intent behind us wanting to start this podcast, of us taking things little by slowly. We're still learning. We don't know all of the facts. We don't know everything that's out there, and we're still growing and questioning everything that's around us. And I think this is a perfect example of that, in us saying like, this is just based off of quick research that we've done throughout the week in preparation for this podcast, but we still have so much to learn. There's still so much that we're looking to find answers for, and we're looking to understand.
And I still stand by my earlier statement that by no means do you have to be an expert to start talking about it. It's okay to start discussing, and hopefully those who are willing or able to share more resources with you, or be like, hey, you know what, did you actually think about this, or did you see this? Because I think if we wait until we are experts in a topic, I just feel like it's not being productive or doing any good at the end of the day. So yeah, I guess that's just my call to say you don't have to be an expert. But if you're able and willing to start having this conversation, and being able to start saying like, you know what, yeah, I don't know as much on it as I would like to, but I am going to start, and I think that is important and valuable.
So I'm gonna make sure to drop all of the resources and the articles and the artists that I talked about in the description of this video. But thank you again for watching for the 6th week in a row. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for taking these topics and taking all this little by slowly with us, because at the end of the day we really are trying to learn. And I don't know, where was it going?
It was going somewhere great.
It was going somewhere great. But at the end of the day we really are just trying to learn. Yeah, just end it there.
Okay. All right, bye y'all.